Michael with United Veterans Worldwide today for an exciting interview with Basil Catanzaro. I met Basil many years ago. He was the commander of the 96th Civil Affairs Battalion at a Fort Bragg at that time. I was with the 411th Civil Affairs Unit. I was an active guy with that reserve unit and was really wanting to go across to work for Basil and to experience some of the challenges and opportunities that active duty guys got to experience in civil affairs. But I spent a lot of time in Africa, and I'm excited to hear more about Basil's experiences and his journey. So maybe, Basil, I can introduce you to our audience by having you do a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Michael, and thank you for inviting me here today. It's a great opportunity to talk to our veterans, and it's just always a great opportunity to connect. So thank you very much for the invitation. So again, my name is Basil. I enlisted in the Army in 1986, many years ago. I think Reagan was president at the time, so that kind of gives people a little perspective of how long ago that was. I enlisted when I was 19. I was going to college, dropped out, wasn't for me, so at 19 years old, I enlisted in the Army. I spent 8 years enlisted. I started off as an infantryman, served in Korea, in Panama, Korea and 2nd Ranger Battalion. While there, I participated in the invasion of Panama, and then became an interrogator, was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Went to language school to learn Russian at the time. And then in 1994, I was accepted and attended Officer Candidate School, and then started my career as a commissioned officer. So I was private E1 through E6 enlisted, and then O1 through 06 commissioned. I spent my commission years as an infantry officer back in the infantry, and then after 9/11, I applied for and became a civil affairs officer. So from 2003 until I retired in 2020, I served as a civil affairs officer. Did almost 3 years in Afghanistan as a civil affairs officer, plus a lot of other deployments and trips all around the Middle East and Central Asia. So that was my career in a nutshell. And I retired 4 years ago and am partially employed. We'll talk about that later, I guess.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, I'm always intrigued when I hear a person's long military career, because what that tells our global audience today is you're a multifaceted individual where you're not just doing one thing, you're doing 1,000 things over this career and interacting with customs, cultures, language, violence, on and on and on. And it builds us into men who sometimes end up carrying some additional baggage and weight after we're finished. And I want to go back and talk about this experience you said you had in Panama. So you were part of that initial invasion?
Yes. So I was a sergeant, Rifle Ranger Battalion, and we parachuted into Rio Hato airfield. Obviously to take down Manuel Noriega and free the country from his dictatorship. That was we had bases in Panama, but when Noriega took power, he started harassing Americans and American service members, and eventually, I believe he was in Navy 04. It's been so long, I don't remember, but a service member was killed. And I think that was kind of the catalyst for Bush Sr. to pull the trigger and send in the invasion. So it was my first foray into combat, and taught me a lot. And I think a lot of my foundation as a leader was learned, not just from Panama, but serving in 2nd Ranger Battalion. Phenomenal unit, which, by the way, they just had their 50th anniversary this past week. So really laid a foundation for me. which I built on throughout my career after that.
Yeah, for those who don't know, 2nd Ranger Battalion are made up of a bunch of tough individuals who have gone through the gauntlet of Ranger training, whether that be straight through for 2 months or recycling and going all the way around. And what a challenging course that leads leaders to be better people. And yeah, I'm impressed by what you've been able to do. The people of Panama, I'm sure, are grateful that they were liberated from that dictator in a lot of ways. Was there any kind of reconciliation, reconstruction that happened after that invasion?
There was. I actually, first time I ever heard of civil affairs. I ran into some civil affairs team members while I was down there, and I believe they stayed afterwards. And we did do, but shortly after that, our lease was up, and we gave the canal back to the country of Panama. And then soon after that, China moved in and started exerting their influence in the country, which happens every time we pull out of any place around the world.
Yeah.
So Chinese influence. I mean, they're always waiting for us to leave someplace so they can go right in and move in on our heels.
Yeah, I've got a story from Africa. I was in, I think it was Uganda, and we were going to build a school, and the local population took me out to the site where they wanted to build this school, and I said, yeah, U.S. funds can help do this. I'm going to go back and secure some of the documents, and then we'll come back in 2 months and we'll build you this school. Well, I came back 2 months later on my own to go look at the site again and review it, and there was a school built, and it said, from the people of China or something on there. Done, complete, empty. Nobody was in the school, but the school was built.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about Africa once we get to my post-retirement discussion. But yes, they are exerting a lot, waging economic warfare all over the globe.
Well, yeah, and I couldn't believe that they had eyes on what I was doing, and I was unaware, to the point where they said, oh, he's going to do this, we're going to do this. And that influence was pretty amazing. Unlimited funds, it seemed, at some points, too. Well, that's great. So you said you spent 3 years in Afghanistan. If I were to have you sum up over your career, which was a long career, very involved, what would you pull out would be the key highlights from your career over that time frame?
Hands down, the most rewarding and gratifying job that I did was being a battalion commander. And that's serving in Range Battalion as a sergeant and going back as a lieutenant, being a company commander, but commanding the 96th Civil Affairs Battalion, which you can see my plaque right behind me.
Right.
I had the most amazing men and women in my battalion, and I live vicariously through them. I couldn't be more proud of all the work that they did. When I was commanding, we had 6 companies: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Fox, and then my headquarters company. So 7 companies in total. And at any one time, I had 2 companies deployed all around the Middle East and Central Asia. So Afghanistan, Lebanon, Jordan, Tajikistan, Qatar. I stood up a team while I was commander. My soldiers stood up. I won't say I stood up. My soldiers stood up a presence in Yemen. We had been in there previously, and then went back when I was battalion commander. And they did the most amazing things. And it was both good and bad. The bad, I lost soldiers killed and wounded while we were in Afghanistan. But then I also had soldiers who were awarded Silver Star, Bronze Stars with Valor Device, Army Commendation Medals with Valor Device, Purple Hearts, 2 companies on one deployment, which is 64 soldiers, were in over 120 troops in contact with the Taliban. So it was, but then you juxtapose that with all of the phenomenal things that they did with building, renovating schools or building schools, or in Tajikistan, and medical clinics, and connecting with ambassadors, having the ambassador of Jordan say that his civil affairs team was the most effective U.S. government entity to deal with the Syrian refugee crisis. And that was 4 soldiers working for the ambassador, and that includes all these other agencies, Department of State, USAID, and all the NGOs and all that were working for the embassy. So, I couldn't be prouder of the work and the courage and the bravery of what those soldiers did. And I just kind of sat back and put out guidance and just watched them make magic happen. And so, hands down, my best part of my career.
Yeah, that inspires so much hope, and I hope that people are listening. If there are some who are considering going into the military or even considering switching into civil affairs, I hope that gives you some excitement to what the adventure of civil affairs really holds for people. It was the best military job I ever did, and wished I could have done it longer before I was injured. So yeah, I would still be doing it today probably if I didn't have my shoulder issues. So life. Life
happens.
It does happen. So your Afghan deployments, were you there on the ground 3 different times, you said?
No, I was there 5 times for a total of just about 3 years. So every deployment was a different length of time. So I was there as a captain, and I did 3-month deployments as a civil affairs team leader, and those deployments were all with 1st Ranger Battalion. So I did the whole span of the regiment. I was stationed in 2nd Ranger Battalion as a sergeant. I was in 3rd Ranger Battalion as a lieutenant, and then as a civil affairs team leader, I deployed 3 times with 1st Ranger Battalion, and plus did all the pre-deployment training with them as well. So I was attached to them. Then as a major, I went back as a planner for 82nd Airborne. I was there for 16 months as a brigade civil affairs planner. I was part of the brigade staff. And then I went back again as a major, working for Coalition Forces Special Operations Component Command, which was a 1-star headquarters for all of the special operations forces, and we were working on the program Village Stability Operations. And my boss at the time was, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, one of the greatest leaders I've ever worked for. And our boss was, at the time, Brigadier General Scotty Miller, who was another phenomenal commander. And he was the last 4-star commanding officer in Afghanistan until the withdrawal. I sent you Scotty Mann's interview that he just did with Sean Ryan,
right?
And who is to this day still involved with working with the Afghan expat community and still trying to rescue them out of Afghanistan. And then my final deployment there, as a battalion commander, I deployed for 4 months, working for the Special Operations Joint Task Force, which was for working as the J9. I set up the J9 there for, at the time, Major General Tony Thomas, who later retired as the SOCOM commander. So 6 deployments to Afghanistan for a total of 6 years. So deployments were anywhere from 3 to 16 months in length.
Yeah, that's a long part of your life that was spent there. What was your experience with the Afghan people that you came in contact with?
Absolutely wonderful. My first 3 times I was there, I was in a beard and civilian clothes and long hair, and many. I remember one time our vehicle broke down, so we got out of vehicles and we were kind of pulling security. And I had a villager come over to me, and he's pointing at me. He's like, "Pashtu, Pashtu," and I'm like, "Niashta, Americani." He's like, "Niashta, Pashtu, Pashtu." So, because of my Greek and Sicilian descent, when I grow a full beard, I very much blend in. As a matter of fact, my first deployment, I was up in Nuristan, and the Army, in all its wisdom, gave me a Dari interpreter. Well, in Nuristan, they speak Nuristani and Pashtun. They don't speak Dari, so my interpreter was completely useless to me. So, as I mentioned, I went to Defense Language Institute to study Russian, and later got my bachelor's degree from George Mason University in Russian Studies. So I was pretty fluent at the time in Russian. So I said in Russian, knowing the history of Afghanistan and the Russian occupation in the 70s and 80s, I said in Russian, "Does anybody here happen to speak Russian?" And the village elder and his uncle both said, "Yes, we both speak Russian." So I said, "Well, is it okay if we speak Russian, because the interpreter, this whole conversation in Russian, the interpreter doesn't speak Pashto or Nuristani, and I don't want to offend you by speaking Russian." And the elder, Muhammad, I can't remember his last name, but his uncle was Basil Catanzaro. I'll never forget his name. But Muhammad said, people are political, languages are not, let's just speak in Russian. So they asked me my name, and, although my name is Basil, it's from Greek, which is Vasily, which is also a very common Russian name. So I said, in Russian, my name is Vasily, and they asked me why I had a Russian name. And I said, well, my Vasily is also a Greek name, and my grandparents are from Greece. And Basil Catanzaro threw up his hands, and said, "We are all descendants of Alexander the Great. That means we're brothers." So I was like, "Yes, we are." And I had instantaneous rapport with them. And it was, so, you mentioned culture, and it just shows you how backward looking many other cultures are, that they look at their descendancy from Alexander the Great as a source of pride. And being a Greek, and my mother's parents and her eldest sister all immigrated from Greece, and growing up, it was kind of like my big fat Greek wedding.
Yeah.
So it was tremendous. I could have planned it more perfectly if I tried, but God was smiling on me, and it was just tremendous experience. And we were able, and all of my experiences with the Afghans were very, very cordial. And over 3 years, I learned, I picked up a lot of Pashto. I have no choice. And the more Pashto I learned, and the longer my beard got, the more I was endeared to the locals. And the other thing was, I cared about my mission, and I cared about the Afghan people. And I think that's something that you can't fake, and they are able to see it. A lot of people will equate education with intelligence, which by no means. I mean, these were very uneducated people, but very intelligent and a lot of wisdom. And they were able to see through Americans who tried to fake sincerity and really didn't care about them and just wanted to get their deployment over. But I really did care about the Afghan people, and they were very endearing people and hospitable. And so I was able to just develop very close relationships. And because I was going back deployment after deployment, I built up relationships with Afghans, both the locals and our interpreters, over the years, that I was able to keep them over my multiple deployments.
Yeah, that's amazing. I often think if civil affairs had been employed early enough on the initial invasion into Iraq, if they had led with civil affairs, I wonder if the outcome would have been different in a shorter conflict. There's so much to understanding the people, the population, the history, how they function that would have, and we led with infantry, and it's just not the same. Yeah.
Well, so Iraq and Afghanistan are completely different operational environments.
Yeah.
But this is a discussion that I say discussion, really an argument I've had with many leaders in the Army over the last, it's been 23 years now since we first invaded.
Yeah.
It's how do you conduct counterinsurgencies? And in my job now, I actually teach insurgency and counterinsurgency for Special Operations Command. But, you can't kill yourself out of a counterinsurgency. And leaders don't get it. When I was in Afghanistan with the 82nd for 16 months, my brigade commander was Marty Schweitzer, who retired Brigadier General Schweitzer, and Marty is just a guy who gets it. And this is a door-kicking infantryman, a man's man, 6'4", 240-pound paratrooper who, when I left the brigade and at my farewell, he paid me the ultimate compliment. Was he said, when we went into Afghanistan as a brigade, there were 3 people who understood insurgencies. And he said, I wasn't one of them, referring to himself, but he said Basil was one of them. He, prior to us going in, we had a pre-deployment meeting with all of the PRT commanders, all of our battalion commanders, all of our attached units. And his comment was, I don't care if we don't kill one Taliban as long as we can connect the people to the government of Afghanistan. And Marty got it. And I think if we had more leaders who understood that paradigm, we would have been a lot more successful in both countries. But we had so many leaders that just felt that you could just kill your way out of the insurgency, and you can't, because they don't understand the concept of a population-centric warfare. Another one of my great leaders and mentors that I still get together with on a regular basis is Lieutenant General Nagata, who was a former SOCCENT commander. And we were, at the time when I was a battalion commander, he was a SOCCENT commander, and we were talking about Pakistan. And at the time, we previously had a huge presence in Pakistan, but it was drawn down to one Special Forces lieutenant colonel. And he was having a commander's conference and asking everybody what we would do if we got back into Pakistan. And he said, and all the Special Forces and Rangers and SEALs and Marine Special Ops were all talking about all these things. I don't know if there's too much background noise.
I don't hear it.
Okay. Garbage truck's going by and I've got the windows open because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And he finally gets up and he goes, we can do all of the partnering with the Pakistan military. We can do all of the training of Pakistan military. He goes, but until we get civil affairs and PSYOPs in here to influence the local population, we will never get anywhere in Pakistan. And so you have these amazing leaders and that understand it, but they are so few and far in between. And it's irregular warfare, population-centric warfare, guerrilla warfare is really PhD level warfare. And we have so many leaders that are at the high school level. It's just such a sophomoric understanding of irregular warfare, and I think that's why we would end up not making headway in either country.
Right. Right.
So.
Right, and I definitely want to touch on more of that, Basil, but I want to go back and comment on your your beard reference when you were in a different country. You know, when I started this global channel, it'll be 11 weeks ago this week, and I'm now sitting at about 35,000 subscribers globally. I was talking about wisdom one day and said, "Here's a bit of wisdom." Whatever I said, and somebody commented, like, in my country, you can't speak about wisdom unless you have a beard. And I said, say no more. I will start that day. Second piece here, you mentioned your ancestry. I think there's so much that's unknown in the world today about where people come from today, and people are confused and lost about who their families are, and I think there's so much to gain from that, and I'll probably do a couple of episodes about Ancestry.com and Family Search and other things for people to explore that a little bit more. But when my dad was in the Air Force, he was stationed Italy, Greece, and Germany. And so my growing up years were in all three of those countries. More time spent in Italy and Greece. So, parla che, efkaristo, you know, hopa. I loved my experiences traveling globally, and I really think it gave me the insight into culture and customs that I wanted to pursue for the rest of my life, which easily led into my joining the military and seeing the world in a lot of ways. Basil, when you talk about your experiences with the Afghan people, my heart starts to hurt, because all of the effort, the blood spilt, our pullout of Afghanistan mirrored very similar to the pullout of Korea. Last helo off the building, people are clamoring to try to get on.
Vietnam.
Or Vietnam, excuse me. And yeah, and it's just heartbreaking to see that we relived history in such a sad way. Tell me about your experience with that closing out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, so I was at the time, and still am, a contractor. I do part-time contract work, and I was working for Special Operations Command's Joint Special Operations University, and I had one of the guys call me, and he called me like a couple days after, and this guy, I don't want to mention his name, but I've never met him in person, but we talk on the phone all the time, and sometimes he would just call me, and we developed like just kind of this relationship, and we had a ton of friends in common because, you know, both retired colonels. And he called me a couple days after, and he was just so distraught. And he's like, "What did we do it for? What we just wasted 20 years." And it was breaking my heart just to listen to him. And you know, two other quick vignettes. Last year, at my church, I was teaching a course on English as a second language. And in my class, I had a number of Afghan refugees in my class. And they, you know, so there was immediate rapport. And, you know, I would always, like, in my class, there was like 4 levels of English. You know, I had the advanced level, but there were 3 other levels. But so we had about 20 Afghans coming every Tuesday, and every time they would come in the morning, I would welcome them. Salam alaikum, saying, and as they were leaving, and, you know, I would say goodbye to them. And the ones that were in my class, you know, I would always kind of give them assignments, you know, because I had a lot of Central and South Americans in my class. I had a Korean one. But I would always, you know, give them assignments and have them talk about, you know, tell me about your favorite food from your country. Tell me about, you know, have them just do little oral reports about their home country, whether it's about food or travel, whatever. They, you know, they always would express how much they love their country. but how much they missed it and how heartbroken they were. And then, the last thing I'll talk about was I was at Verizon, and the customer rep there was helping me. I asked him where he was from, and he said he was from Afghanistan. And I asked him, "Are you Pashto or Dari?" And he goes, "Well, I speak both." So I, said hello to him, and so we started talking. And this was just a couple of weeks ago, and he was, you could just see the pain in his eyes. And he's like asking me, he goes, "Well, someone who was there for so long, do you think Afghanistan will ever be free again?" And I said, I don't know. That the Taliban is very brutal, and they're never going to give up power willingly. And, he's like, he said he hurt so much for his country. And, I went out, my wife was waiting for me in the car, and, I just started welling up because, I spent 3 years in that country, and I met so many people, and I worked with so many Afghans, and I don't know if any of them are still alive. Mm-hmm. I don't know who killed. When we left, it wasn't just leaving. We left billions of dollars of weapons and equipment, and we left all of our computers, which had contacts, people with whom we worked, and I highly encourage your listeners to listen to Scott Mann and Sean Ryan interview, and they will go very in depth about that, the effects of that withdrawal. But for me personally, it is heartbreaking, and every time I see Afghans, because here in the Northern Virginia area, DC area, we have a large expat community. A lot of Afghans settled here, and I run into them all the time, and it's heartbreaking. And then I was just at a homesteading sheep and wool festival on Saturday with my wife and daughter, and I met a Marine who was wounded, and you see the physical wounds of many Americans, and I've constantly run into many friends who were wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan both, and it's heartbreaking. But the one of the things that consoles me a little bit was the time we were there. I do know that there were countless attacks on the U.S. homeland that were thwarted because of what we did there. Mm-hmm. There's much intelligence that we gathered from the time we were in Afghanistan, and we prevented many, many attacks on the homeland. So, yes, we lost a lot of lives there, but who knows how many thousands of lives were spared here in the U.S. Because of the attacks that we did prevent from what we were doing over there. So we can look back at that and take heart and, have that to kind of console us a little bit. What the future holds, Afghanistan is once again a hotbed of insurgent activities. I mean, we invaded Afghanistan to prevent it from being a safe haven for terrorists. Well, there are over 20 terrorist groups that are operating freely there now. So we don't know what the future is going to hold.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be good. I'm sad that the American people's tolerance for the loss of life of service members is growing. The intolerance is growing. I mean, if you look back at like Vietnam and the 55,000 or something that we lost there, Afghanistan, maybe it's 4 or 5, maybe, I don't know. And I'll mention just briefly that the war that comes home with some of us with PTSD or TBI related things that bring on the demons of depression and anxiety. and we continue to lose more and more service members today. And we'll get into some more of the trauma that you've experienced yourself personally, Basil. But I do want to just put a pitch in for people who are struggling today with depression, anxiety, and some PTSD, who are resistant to going to some therapy to try to work through some of these things. I just want to say that there is light after darkness. There is hope. There is a way to progress to a new normal. And that new normal that Basil's found, that I've found, is now dedicated to giving back and strengthening those of us who have served and will serve in the future. Basil, can you walk me through some of the personal tragedies that you've experienced that have put you in a place that is many of us can relate to in terms of darkness?
Sure. So on the suicide thing, let me just tell you about 3 stories.
Yeah, please.
I have 3 friends. One was a civil affairs officer, one was a special forces officer, and one was a Navy SEAL. All 3 of them had suicidal ideations. 2 of them came home and dealt with both of those for many years. And there's still struggles, but 2 of them are doing very well. That's the civil affairs officer and the special forces officer. Both are now, one's retired, one's about to retire. The other one was a Navy SEAL. So prior to becoming a battalion commander, I went to the Special Operations Command, SOCOM, pre-command course. My command sergeant major and I went together. And while we were there, we met a Navy SEAL commander and his command master chief petty officer. So the 4 of us, commander and senior enlisted advisor, all 4 of us went to the SOCOM command course together. And we found out that one of the companies was going to be attached to the SEAL commander, to his special operations task force on our deployment. So we developed a relationship, and then we did pre-deployment training together. You know, my company was training with the SEALs, and my command sergeant major and I went out and, observed a lot of the pre-deployment training, and then we all deployed together. So we were in Afghanistan, and I would talk with him, the SEAL commander. We'd email. I got to go visit some of my teams that were attached to his SOTF, and then one day we're on the phone with them. I spoke with him about 15 minutes. I'm like, how my guys doing? He's like, oh, they're doing great, And by the way, this is the deployment where I had a sergeant killed, a couple of my soldiers were wounded, and all of the Valorous Awards and everything. And 2 weeks later, that SEAL commander killed himself while deployed. And the post-death investigation said that, he was dealing with a lot. He took the blame of my soldier who was killed, a PSYOP soldier who was killed, a bunch of other SEALs and others within his task force that were killed and wounded. He kind of took the blame on himself and was just dealing with a lot of other stuff. So I say all that, I've had very close friends who have dealt with this issue, and so many more that I could name that. I just use those as 3 examples, and 2 who fought through the depression, and 1 who gave into it. And this was like a very successful SEAL commander. I mean, we're talking like, he would have been an admiral. So for me personally, shortly after that deployment, and I came out of battalion command in 2014, immediately was selected and attended War College. I went to the National War College here in Washington, D.C., and at that point, I had been married 24 years, 2 children, and halfway through War College, my wife started getting sick, having some issues. We celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary on January 20th, 2015. I graduated War College in June, and I was to be assigned to Special Operations Command. And during my transition, my wife was still getting sick and going back and forth to the doctor. Well, we were in transit moving from DC to Tampa, and we stopped in Fort Bragg on our way down just to see some friends during our move. And on July 27th, 2015, my wife was like, we need to go to the ER, and we went in and they ran some tests. And on July 27th, the doctor said she had lung cancer. And she had previously been diagnosed with acid reflux, allergies, anxiety for that year prior while I was at War College. July 27th, she was diagnosed. 86 days later, she died of lung cancer. 86 days from diagnosis to death. My daughter had turned 13, 12 days before my wife passed away. My son was 19 at the time, and it was just a knife in the gut that I never could have imagined. And as I shared with you previously, as military members, we do so much to prepare our families for us being killed in combat. We do nothing for the service member to be prepared for that. Yeah. So my wife, who had powers of attorney, she had control of the bank accounts. She paid all the bills because I was deploying back and forth. She was responsible for raising the kids. She was responsible for paying the bills, running the household, being a single mom. Every time I deployed, now all of a sudden I'm the single dad. She was 86 days. She was like going for cancer treatments and telling me all the bills that we had, giving me the passwords to all the bank accounts. All the stuff that she was responsible for. Now all of a sudden I'm doing that. And now all of a sudden I'm a single parent of a teenage daughter, a teenage son, having to figure out everything by myself and be a full-time soldier. One of the things that she said right before she was, right after she was diagnosed, was, one, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And the next thing she said was, thank God you're in the Army, and thank God you're in Special Operations, because she knew that the Special Operations community would take care of us. And they did. And the Special Operations Command has an organization called the not Wounded Warriors. It's the I'm sorry, I'm having a.
That's okay. I'll block this out.
It'll come to me. But they have an organization which is a congressionally mandated organization within Special Operations Command to care for special operators and their families in case of death, injury, or illness. So her diagnosis fell under that, and they just did a phenomenal job. And essentially, I hadn't even signed in yet, and my chain of command said, sign in, don't burn your leave. As soon as I got down there and they found out about the diagnosis, and they said, go home, take care of your family. And I went home, took care of my family, and then my wife passed away. And then right after that, it was, okay, take care of your kids. And I immediately got a compassionate reassignment back to Fort Bragg because my kids were basically raised there. They just did everything, took care of me and my family. Just unbelievable amount of support. While I was in Tampa, my wife's best friend, they flew her from, she was in Hawaii at the time. They flew her from Hawaii to Tampa, and then to help take care of my daughter and wife while she was sick. And then once my wife passed away, they flew her back out again to help me take care of my wife's effects and my daughter. I mean, it was just unbelievable, the support that I got. One of my friends that I had been friends with since I was a captain, and now I'm a lieutenant colonel. Like I said, my daughter had turned 13, and this is 12 days before my wife passed, and I'm like, Kyle, what am I supposed to do? He's like, don't worry. He and my friend Tony, they're like, well, what does your daughter want to do for her birthday? I'm like, I don't know. She said something about a luau. These guys, they're both civil affairs officers. They, in short term, put together a luau birthday party for my daughter. They got flowers. They had a restaurant donate Hawaiian rice and pork, and they got just pulled out all the stops. And sorry,
no.
give me 1 second.
No, go for it.
They just gave my daughter a 13th birthday party that she'll never forget, for both reasons. Not only because it was 12 days before my wife passed, but because my Army brothers just came out and support. So I mentioned to you, as I was going through this time, I was unable to do anything, and I had 3 families that really took care of me. I had my military family. I had my biological family, my brother, my sister, my cousins, aunts and uncles, and then I had my church family, who came, and I had many people who, if you put a Venn diagram of military family, church family, biological family, I had people who were in that overlapping, and I couldn't do it without me, and without any of them. And they just came and supported me, because there was times where I just did not know what to do, and it was at that time, this was 2015. So I think I was 29 years in the Army, something like that. I was successful, airborne ranger, jump master, pathfinder, years of combat. I was successful everywhere I went, and I never would have thought of myself as a prideful person. I've always realized that my success was God's providence and favor on me. But boy, when you get to this point of your life, you're just so broken. At this point, I had already completed about 3 years in Afghanistan, and plus invasion of Panama, and I was just so broken, and any bit of pride I did have at that time was gone. And because I had to ask people to do things for me that I just couldn't do myself. And I think that's part of the thing when you're going through trauma, is you have no choice but to ask for help. I got to a point where I was asking for people, and I didn't know if they could help me or not, but I knew, and it wasn't about me, because it was just me. I just like muscle my way through it. But I had 2 kids that I had to take care of. 13-year-old daughter. I had to do it for her. I had my son, and my brothers and my sisters, I knew that there are people that out there who love me, and they expressed it. And I think there's so many people that don't realize that there are people out there that love them and would be devastated. And when you talk about suicide, we think it's the easy way out, but and I have, I mentioned my one Navy SEAL commander friend, but not just him. I mean, I have a cousin who committed suicide when I was in high school. I had many other people throughout my life who have committed suicide. People don't realize how heartbreaking it is for everybody else that's left behind.
Yeah.
And you can't just think that things are hopeless.
Yeah.
And there are people out there that love you, and you think that things are just beyond what you can handle. And you know what? They are beyond what you can handle, but it's not beyond what you and your friends and family can handle.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a Lone Ranger. Even a Lone Ranger had tonto.
Yep. Right.
That's probably a reference that most people today don't understand.
They don't know. Yeah.
Lone Ranger is. But nobody goes through a fight on your own. There are so many people to our left, and who are right, who are just wanting to help you. And I still talked with buddies all the time, and people are always, how are you doing? And sometimes the answer of your hopelessness is not. You may think that nobody's out there to help you, but sometimes it's you. Even though you think you're at rock bottom, it's helping someone else. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people and who are struggling, and it encourages me to help them. So sometimes the answer is maybe not. Someone's maybe not calling you, but maybe it's you need to stop looking at yourself and looking at all the problems you have, and looking at your buddy that you suffered with who may be going through the same thing. There's a great scripture of the Bible. There's no temptation except that you're going through except that which is common to man. And we all go through temptations, and one of those temptations is to find the easy way out.
Yeah.
But it's not unique. The struggles that we go through as veterans is not unique. There are so many people who are going through the same things, and we all need each other. And we've got to reach out when we see, not only when we see someone who's struggling, but when we see someone who's doing well, we've got to reach out to them because, as we all know,
yeah.
The face of depression is not someone who looks like they're struggling. The face of depression is someone who looks like everything is going well. My Navy SEAL buddy, when I talked to him like 10 days before he took his own life, you never would have known.
Yeah.
He was, we were talking and joking, and he's like, yeah, everything's going great. Your guys are doing well. Never would have known for the life of me that anything was wrong. But he never came up and said, hey, I'm not doing well.
Yeah.
But we've got to ask the hard questions. We've got to ask each other, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. No, I'm not talking about how things are going. I'm like, how are you doing? And we've really got to pull back the onion peel and really dig in and ask the hard questions. But that's not going to happen for someone that we talk to every 6 months.
Right.
We've got to develop those relationships, and we've got to be in daily community with people, and we've got to be there for each other. We've got to ask the hard questions, and we can't just sit there and pretend like everything's going okay. And when we see people who are exhibiting behaviors that are not healthy, we've got to call them on it. We can't just brush it under the carpet.
Yeah, Basil, I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing this sensitive story of loss. And, I felt it when you were saying it. I felt it when you told me before. It's got to be one of the hardest challenges and trials of a life, to have to go through that. I'm so glad that you had people that surrounded you, showed you love, that bore you up, and your kids, at a time when it was very stressful and you needed assistance. And I'm glad that whatever depression or anxiety you may have felt through those experiences, you've come out on top. And yeah, I have a similar story of a buddy who was a civil affairs sergeant who deployed to Pakistan, got in an automobile accident with a family on a bike and killed them. Never recovered from it. And I went out to lunch with him at Fort Bragg, and he never disclosed that he was struggling. And it was like the same thing. 3 weeks later, I was at a conference in D.C., and somebody across the table said, "Justin, yeah, he died." And I was like, "What?" And at the time, I just erupted in emotion. I was angry. I was sad. I was hurt. I would have done everything. I would have dropped everything, to go be with him. But he never vocalized his inward battle. And for his spouse and kids today, my heart goes out, and I still reach out periodically to see how they're doing. But yeah, it's not an easy way out. It leaves a catastrophic runway of mess that people have to deal with for years.
Yeah, and I think there's something else I want to address real quickly is depression. When you go through things, everybody thinks like depression is this new psychological term, but it's nothing more than grief. And grief has been around since man has been on Earth.
Yeah.
It's a normal. Depression, sadness, grief, guilt, those are actually normal. And if you don't feel those things, excuse me, if you don't feel those things, there's probably something wrong. It's not, so the problem is not being depressed, not feeling grief, not being sad. That's not the problem. It's how we process it. And I had a pastor once, say, there's no wrong way to deal with grief. I would agree with that to a point. Everybody deals with grief in different ways. The one wrong way to deal with it is if it's harmful to you or others. But short of that, there's lots of ways that people deal with grief and depression and sadness. But we just need to figure out what works best for us. And it can't be harmful to yourself or to others. It can't be ignored. Ignoring it is not a way to deal with it.
No.
It needs to be dealt with. But then the other thing I would say is it can't be dealt with alone. But short of those three things, there's plenty of ways to deal with it. And it's got to be with other people, and you've got to have community. And if you don't, and if people are not reaching out to you, then make the first step and reach out to someone else. One resource that I think is a phenomenal one, it's called Grief Share, is a phenomenal resource. You should Google griefshare.org, I believe it, and you can put add your zip code in, and they will tell you about a grief share group near you. I went through the thing. It's like a 13 session program, and it's very, very practical. It deals with, what do you do with your lost loved ones' clothes, and how do you handle anniversaries and birthdays and the anniversary of their death or the holiday. Very, very practical ways to cope with it. And but whatever it is, it needs to be dealt with. And I just encourage people to deal with it. And you've got to do. be part of community to deal with it.
Yeah, perfect. Basil, you've walked me through a lot of a career in a really short period of time. Talk to me for the last couple of minutes here about what you're doing today and where you're at in your family and your life.
Sure. So I retire. Everybody said you'll know when it's time to retire, and boy, I sure did. It was in January 2020. Well, right around 2019, 2020, end of 2019, beginning 2020. I was like, yeah, it's time, and I retired. And lo and behold, COVID hit. So I think it was probably a good thing, because I don't know if I would have been able to have handled dealing with the COVID, dealing with the military and how the military responded to COVID. But it was a good time for me to retire. So I retired, and one bit of advice someone told me a long time ago was, when you retire, take 6 months and do nothing. And I did. And just so happens it was during COVID, so the world kind of helped me do nothing.
Right.
But it was great. I had a small group of friends. We used to hang out every week together. In some cities, I probably would have been arrested for doing what we did, but we did wear masks. But we used to go, get together, and we would go to DC, and it was like a ghost town, but we would just walk around, 8-10 of us, and we would just kind of walk around the city or hang out, or as things started opening up. And then I did a lot of landscaping in my property and just kind of took advantage of it. And then 2021, I started working part-time as a government contractor. And I go overseas and I teach classes for militaries, and I do that today. Probably do, about 4, 5, 6 every year is a little bit different. But I go all over right now, Asia and Africa, and I teach classes for militaries, and it's great. In 2021, at my church, I met a woman who we were friends. We met in our church, and we had been friends for a little bit. And as we were coming out of COVID, we became friends. And one day, light switch went on in my brain, and I'm like, this woman's amazing. Mm-hmm. Long story short, 2 years ago, we got married, and so now my wife and my 2 kids, we all live together, and my kids are both adults, but they have their own lives, but life is going great. She works full time, but we are still very involved in our church, and doing the contracting gig. And when I'm not doing that, when I'm not working part-time as a contractor, going overseas and traveling, I'm a full-time house husband and landscaper of my property, and working in ministry. So it's things are phenomenal. I couldn't imagine things being better right now.
Well, that is so great to hear. You've shared with us some hard experiences. You've shared with us a long career, and you've taken us to the other side where you said things could not be better right now, and you deserve it. You deserve to be happy. Thank you very much for your service. Thanks very much for your dedication to protecting our country in so many ways, and dedication to your faith and family as well. It's admirable, and I appreciate your experiences being shared today with this global audience. I hope, guys, you've taken some notes, learned from what Basil shared with us today, especially his advice to connect with other people, reach out. No one saves themselves, as he said, and find a way to find happiness in your life. And there's more to come after struggles. So, Basil, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope to have more interactions with you in the future. Any final comments you'd like to make to our listeners today?
One, thank you again for this opportunity. As you say, a global audience, and I hope there are military members from others that will listen to this. As I said, I go all over the world, and work with foreign militaries, mostly Africa and Asia, but throughout my career I've worked with a lot of partnered forces from other countries, and our partners and allies out there all across the globe. Not enough can be said about the partnership, especially over the years since 9/11, with whom we've worked, not only in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the struggles that our partners have all across the globe, fighting terrorism and instabilities in their own countries. And this is just a great venue to keep those relationships going. So thank you to all of our international partners, and for my fellow Americans, thank you for all that you have done, and never give up. Keep those relationships going with your friends and families, and even if there are people who haven't served. Trust me, there are so many Americans out there that they may have never served, but they can be a good person to just lend an ear. So don't discount them, even though they've never served. I have so many friends that are never served, have no idea what I'm talking about when I use acronyms and stuff like that, but they are so appreciative of what our military has done over the last, really from the history of our country. And they love our veterans, and they love you, and just are always there to help as well. So thank you, and I appreciate this opportunity.
All right, Basil, thanks. We'll reconnect another time.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Much appreciated.